I never thought I would ask to join a family vacation would end revealing what they really thought about me. It was in the kitchen, with the coffee maker crackling and the sun filtering barely through the blinds, when I dared to say it. And if this time I could go with you guys? My son Brian barely raised his cell phone view. He missed a laughter so light, so automatic, that for a second I thought I hadn't even listened. But then came the dagger. "Mom, at your age waking up is already an adventure," he said, smiling, and added without looking at me, "You better take care of the house." Yes. I stood still with the cup in my hand and the little spoon barely trembling against the glass. I felt something inside me broke into silence. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded, faking a smile that hurt me more than any slap. I had always dreamed of traveling. Always. Since I was a child, I cut out postcards from old magazines, imagining how it would be walking through European castles or tasting a wine in front of the Rhine. But duty, motherhood, payments, there was always a reason to leave it for later. And now, at 73, when I finally thought that later had arrived, my son told me to stay among the stained curtains in the living room and the ghosts of a sacrificed youth. After they got into the car, everyone laughing and carrying the suitcases, I stayed on the porch with my own luggage still packed. Nobody noticed my suitcase. Nobody asked if I needed anything. It was as if I were part of the furniture, like the wall clock or the broken coat rack. I entered back to the house, that house that I paid, that I built with my effort and my sleepless nights, and I stopped in front of the hall mirror. I saw myself small, invisible, as if time had gradually erased me. "I raised Brian here," I said in a low voice. "And now it's my turn to ask permission to enter the kitchen." I laughed half-heartedly. What other option did I have? Just keep playing dumb? Pretend it didn't hurt? No, this time I got over the day in silence. I put the suitcase away without hurry, folding each blouse as if they were the last remnants of a dream. But that night, when there was no more noise in the house, when only the crickets outside and the ticking of the clock inside, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to die like this, forgotten, despised. I wasn't just his mother, I was also a woman. A woman who worked all her life, who loved, who lost, who gave everything, and who still had a right to something of her own. The pain was turning into something finer, sharper, a decision. I didn't say anything, I didn't write notes, but the next day I called Rita, my old friend, and while we were chatting about the weather and how expensive the bread was, I dropped the phrase like someone throwing a stone in a lake. "I think I need to know if the house is still in my name." And that's where it all began. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. The echoes of Brian's laughter and the children were still floating in the air like smoke from a recently extinguished candle. I sat on the edge of the bed with the suitcase open at my feet, looking at the clothes that I had packed with more hope than certainty. I folded them one by one, linen shirts that I thought I'd premiere at a dinner at sunset, a wide-brimmed hat I found on sale that made me feel like an elegant tourist, and my locket I always carry, even if no one asks for it. Putting it all back was harder than packing it. Do you know what's the cruelest part of hope? That it makes you dream in silence without witnesses. No one knew that for weeks I was reviewing hidden travel guides inside old magazines. Nobody noticed my new passport, nor the perfume that I bought just in case. All my life I wanted to see the world, but between Brian's diapers, the double-shift nights, and the accounts that never gave me a break, that one day stretched out until it faded away. I never left the United States, didn't even cross into Mexico, although I live a couple of hours away from the border. There was always something more urgent, more important than me. And now that the calendar seemed to give me permission, my own children had closed the door on me. I approached the window. From there, I saw Brian's car drive away with his son's bike hanging in the back and the map stuck to the windshield. Not a look back, not a goodbye beyond, protect the house from the cold. I squeezed the locket against my chest. Inside, it has a photo of me as a young woman with baby Brian in my arms, smiling with a mixture of fear and love. That woman had plans. That woman deserved more. Who decides when we stop being protagonists in our own lives? I didn't cry. No more. The tears had already fallen on their own while I folded the navy blue dress, the same one I imagined myself wearing at a dinner on some European dock. but now it no longer hurt just the same. Something was hardening in me, something that was not sadness, but clarity. I wasn't going to beg for affection, much less the right to exist with dignity. I went to the kitchen, prepared a chamomile like every night, and sat down to the table alone, looking at the tablecloth that I embroidered myself more than 30 years ago. As I blew the steam, I promised myself something simple. This time I was going to choose me, because no matter how forgotten they make you feel, while you have breath, you can still write the end of your story. And I was just on the first chapter. I walked down the hall as if I were a guest in my own house. Every corner that was once mine now seemed to bear the stamp of another woman. I passed by the guest room, once my sewing corner, and what I saw took my breath away. Piles of plastic containers stacked up to the ceiling with colored labels and handwriting that wasn't mine. Children's clothes, summer toys, Christmas, all written in that round, tight handwriting of my daughter-in-law, as if the house always belonged to her. I touched one of the jars. It was full of scented candles, Nordic vanilla aroma, the label said. What the heck is that? My house never smelled like that. It smelled of freshly baked bread, of lentil soup, of the lavender I myself sewed. I stood in the doorway. I didn't even decide to go in. I kept walking. The traces of my life were being erased one by one, as if I were an uncomfortable chapter that had to be forgotten. I stopped in front of the hall mirror. That mirror has seen me in all my versions, pregnant, young, widowed, tired, strong. I stared at myself. The face that looked back at me was not weak, but it was sad, quietly sad. I raised Brian here, I whispered. My voice trembled, but I continued. I paid for this house. I painted it. I cleaned every corner after working 12 hours straight. And now I have to notify before entering my own kitchen. I swallowed. I just live around their schedules, I muttered, looking at the clock that now had annotations stuck on it, football class, 4 in the afternoon. Zoom meeting. Do not make noise. I turned my wedding ring, the one I never took off, even though love had gone decades ago. I turned it once, twice, a habit I have when I try to calm the storm inside. Maybe they don't care about me anymore. Maybe they see me as an old piece of furniture that doesn't match the decor. I squeezed my lips, but I'm still here. I'm still breathing. And that means I still have a voice, even if they don't listen to it, even if it's not worth hearing. I walked away from the mirror with a mixture of contained rage and wounded dignity. It wasn't just a change in the decoration. It was a slow, almost invisible exile, performed with forced smiles and orders wrapped in kindness. Do you know what hurts more than a fight? Silence, that passive form of erasing someone. But I know myself, and I know that when silence becomes unbearable, it's because something is about to change. I went back to the living room. My sewing kit was still under the table. I took it out and stroked the golden scissors handle. I couldn't remember the last time I used them for a hem, a quilt, I don't know. All I know is that a whole life cannot be stored in a plastic box. And while the clock struck 11 and the house was asleep, oblivious to my pain, I made myself another promise. I wasn't going to keep disappearing into silence, because even if they don't see it, I'm still here. And this story isn't over yet. The next day, just after noon, I heard the back door open without much care. There was only one person who came in just like in the old days, without asking permission. Rita Margaret, she shouted from the kitchen. I brought bread and some apples. Yours, you know. She slipped in as always between my things, as if nothing had changed since we were 30. She left the bag on the counter and poured coffee without waiting for an invitation. In a way, she saved my life every time she came. You look skinnier, she said, frowning. That, in her language, meant something's not right, and I want to know everything. I shrugged. She settled at the table and crossed her arms. Where are they? She asked with that tone that doesn't accept evasions. On a trip, I replied. And as if that weren't enough, I added without thinking, I wasn't invited. Rita's eyes fixed on me without blinking. Then she gave a dry laugh. It wasn't joyful, it was bitter. And here you are, the owner of the house, paying for the water, light, gas. And they don't even take you to see the sea. Rita, I tried to soften. No, we're not going to sugarcoat it. You're still paying taxes, right? I felt the blood rush to my face. I hesitated, but I didn't know how to lie to her. Yes, they're still in my name, I said softly, like someone confessing a sin. She leaned back in the chair and looked at me with that half smile she used when she had a plan. So stop behaving as if you were a guest in your own palace, because that's what's yours. I felt so ashamed that I didn't even know what to answer. I just looked at her as I turned my ring again, like a woman trying to find strength in a memory. What if I change the locks? I asked jokingly, but my voice had a hint of truth in it. Better yet, what if you consult with someone who understands papers? I have a lawyer. Well, discreet. The idea made me dizzy. Me, Margaret, consulting lawyers. For what? To reclaim what should already be obvious. But something in me ignited, like a spark that had been asleep for years. I don't want to make a scene, I whispered. You don't need to sometimes, dear. The strongest thing you can do is move silently. I looked at her. She smoothed the tablecloth, the same one I embroidered, and left her hands there firmly. They have erased you slowly, Margaret, but you still have ink. If you want to rewrite your story, I'll lend you the pen. I felt a lump in my throat, but it wasn't from sadness. It was something more like determination. Give me the number of that lawyer. Rita smiled as if she knew this moment would come. She took out a crumpled card from her purse and slid it toward me. Tomorrow at 4 in your discreet garden. As you like it. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept with the window open and without closing my heart. The afternoon sun filtered between the bougainvilleas that Rita helped me plant 20 years ago. She was already sitting on one of the wicker chairs I put next to the rosebush, with a lemonade in hand and a smile that gave me calm and nerves. The lawyer arrived on time. A young man, but with a deep voice that inspired respect, he introduced himself as Tomas. The moment I saw him, I knew Rita had told him everything, not the details, but enough. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Margaret, he said politely. I reviewed the county records as Rita asked me. I took the liberty of printing some copies. He extended a cream-colored folder on the garden table. I looked at it as if it were dynamite. The house is still exclusively in your name, he said in a clear voice. It was never transferred to your son nor to your daughter-in-law. You are listed as the only owner in all records, including mortgage and municipal taxes. I didn't know whether to breathe or cry. So, legally, they can't kick me out. Legally, you could throw them out, he replied without hesitation. I felt my hands tremble. And if I wanted to sell it? Tomas looked at me without surprise. You could do it tomorrow if you so wish. The property is not seized, has no debts, and by its location, would have very interested parties fast. The market is on the rise. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I need your permission to make that decision? Tomas smiled like someone who has good news and is used to giving it with softness. No, Mrs. Margaret. You need no one's permission. This house is yours, only yours. Rita took my hand under the table. She didn't say anything. It wasn't necessary. For years, I felt like an intruder in my own home, asking permission to live, as if I weren't the one who built it from the ground up with my effort. I had ironed every sheet, cooked every meal, paid every penny, and still, I believed the story that I had no right to decide. Thank you, I said to the lawyer, barely a whisper. He nodded, gathered his papers, and said he was at my disposal for any management. When he left, I sat in silence. The breeze smelled of lemon and dried flowers. Rita looked at me sideways, waiting for me to speak, but I had no words, just a certainty that was beginning to take firm root within me. And now what? She asked with an eyebrow raised. I took a sip of lemonade, left the glass on the table, and leaned back in the chair as if, finally, after so much, I had recovered something I didn't even know I had lost. Now, I'm going to sleep peacefully, I said, because for the first time in years, I knew that I wasn't trapped. I was in control. And that, my friend, is more valuable than any late apologies. I didn't sleep that night, but it wasn't because of anguish. It was something else, something more like electricity running under my skin. I went to bed, as always, with my chamomile infusion and my paperback book, the same one I've been reading for months and never finish. But this time, I didn't even open a page. I stared at the ceiling. The lawyer's words were spinning in my head like leaves in a storm. The house is yours, you can sell it tomorrow. Do you realize? For years, I lived asking permission to exist within these walls, and now, suddenly, the world opened like a door without a key. I got up after 2 in the morning, went to the kitchen, turned on just the extractor light, took out paper and pencil from the drawer where I keep the old recipes, and wrote 3 things: call the real estate, check passport, search for destinations. I wrote it without thinking too much, as if I had already decided a while ago. My handwriting was a little shaky, not out of fear, but out of excitement. Do you know what it feels like when you've been swallowing words for years, and one day you suddenly speak out loud? Liberation. That's what it feels like. The next morning, I dressed in my white linen blouse, the one I keep for important things, and combed my hair as if I were going to a job interview. I looked at the mirror without hurry, turned my ring, smiled, and dialed the number of the real estate agency that Rita recommended to me. A very kind woman, Claudia, helped me right away. I'm interested in selling a property, I said in a firm voice. In how long do you want to list the house? She asked. I paused for just a second. As soon as possible. Perfect. We can send someone this week. Just a detail, I added. I want it to be discreet. No one should find out until the house is sold. She understood immediately. She didn't ask me why, just said, of course, Mrs. Margaret. Sometimes the best moves are made in silence. I closed my eyes. That phrase was just what I needed to hear. After I hung up and sat in the living room, surrounded by Brian's grandson's toys, Nicole's candles, the paintings I didn't choose. And yet, I felt more in control of that space than ever before, because now I knew the truth. And when a woman like me, who has been through life sacrificing for others, discovers that she can still make decisions for herself, there is no turning back. I didn't warn anyone. I didn't feel the need to justify myself. Why? I had already been erased from the center of their lives. Only now, I also learned to move without making a sound. And that, my dear, was just the beginning. The house was put up for sale on a Thursday morning, without a sign, no fuss, just a series of calls, discreet emails, and a date with Claudia to take photos while the family was out. I prepared cookies for the occasion, as if that would make the transition gentler. Are you sure about this? Claudia asked me while adjusting her camera in front of the living room window. Surer than ever, I replied as I smoothed the floral tablecloth that I embroidered 30 years ago. The photos came out beautiful, too beautiful, I thought. Maybe because, finally, someone was seeing the house with the eyes with which I always saw it, warm, full of history, and completely mine. Then I sat down in front of the computer and wrote, "Travel for single older women." Just like that, without embellishments, because that's me now, a woman alone, but not empty. The screen filled with options: river cruises, gentle hiking groups, reading retreats in ancient villages. I stopped at one, a cruise on the Rhine, covering Germany, Switzerland, France, and the Netherlands, all inclusive, with watercolor workshops on board. I'd never painted anything in my life, but something in that idea made me smile. I fixed my eyes on the photo of the river, the mountains in the background, the colors of the sunset reflecting in the water. Maybe I'll paint my story, I murmured, even if it's just for me. I saved the link in favorites and kept exploring. It excited me more than I wanted to admit, not only because of the trip, but because for the first time in a long time, I had permission to wish for something. I was not the mother, nor the grandmother, nor the one who fills the refrigerator or pays for the gas. It was Margaret, a woman with a locket around her neck and a whole world to discover. I went to the closet, took out my suitcase, the same one I had packed weeks before Brian laughed in my face. This time, I opened it with determination: comfortable clothes, flat shoes, wide-brimmed hat, the book I never finished, and the locket, always the locket. I checked my passport, spotless, without a single stamp, but not for long. I poured a glass of wine, one that I kept for special occasions, and drank it slowly as the afternoon unraveled in orange tones. I didn't feel alone. I felt at peace. And you know what I discovered that evening? That a woman doesn't need someone to open the door to leave. You just need to remember that you can walk, and that step I had already taken. The first message arrived one Sunday afternoon. I was watering my plants, the few I had left, when the cell phone rang. It was Brian. Everything's fine over there? I read it twice before answering. I thought about putting yes, but that sounded weak. I thought about ignoring it, but that would be playing their game. I wrote, everything's fine. Thank you. No response, just that digital silence that's worse than an argument. The next day, another one arrived. Surely everything's fine. We noticed the house alarm was disconnected. Oh, right. The alarm had been installed without consulting me, like everything else. And now that I had removed it, because the real estate needed it deactivated to show the house, their radar light went on. I took a deep breath and answered with a single word, yes. Outside, the wind moved the dry leaves of the orange tree planted by my husband when Brian was small. I went over to touch its trunk, firm, old, but still standing. I stood there in the garden, thinking, not about Brian, but about me, because something had turned upside down. Before, I was distressed by his messages, as if my place in the world depended on them, but now, they were just noise. That day, I also signed the documents with Claudia. The house was officially listed. She assured me that with how fast the market was moving, we could have a buyer in less than 2 weeks. When she handed me the copy of the contract, my hands trembled, not out of fear, out of power, because I finally had some. Later, I checked Brian's messages again. They were still there, short, distrustful, like a child who begins to suspect his mother is keeping a secret. And he was right. I didn't have to explain, not this time. For years, everything revolved around their well-being, their schedules, their accounts, their priorities. How many times had I kept quiet so as not to upset him? How many times had I endured humiliations disguised as jokes? And now that I was silent, he didn't like it. I lay back on the couch with the knitted blanket that still smells of lavender and closed my eyes. The messages could wait, the suspicions too, because I no longer asked for permission, I decided. And that, darling, was more unsettling than any disconnected alarm. Not even 10 days had passed when Claudia called me excitedly. Sit down, Margaret. I'm always sitting for good news, I told her with a half smile. We have a cash offer above the initial price. I stayed silent for a few seconds, not out of surprise, but from the wave of emotions that fell on me suddenly. So many years of effort, so many times I stopped buying something to pay that mortgage, so many times they told me, hold on a bit more, Mom. And now, like this, in a call, the house that had contained and consumed me for decades was about to change hands. Do you want me to prepare the papers? Claudia asked. I took a slow breath and let it out, as if that would shake off all the old weight. Yes, let's do it. The signing was simple, without speeches, without ceremonies, just Claudia, me, and a pen that signed the closure as if putting an end to a novel. The money was transferred to my personal account in less than 48 hours. I knew the exact moment. I was in the bakery, waiting for my turn to buy rye bread, when the cell phone vibrated in my purse. I opened the bank app, and there it was, the number, big, clean, undeniable. A lifetime of sacrifices finally turned into something mine. I smiled. I didn't even wait for the bread. I walked out slowly, savoring each step as if my shoes were touching new ground. I no longer had to explain myself, no longer had to make room in my own house, no longer had to wait for someone to let me live. I had let go of that house, and in doing so, I had let go of myself. On the way home, still mine for a few more days, I bought a bottle of wine, not a cheap one, not one for visitors, a good one I always looked at on the shelf but never bought because it wasn't necessary. That night, I toasted alone, but I didn't feel alone, I felt whole. And then the strangest thing happened. I felt no guilt, none at all. I thought it would hurt more, that I would cry, that I would miss the noise of the children, the routine of washing other people's dishes. But no, I just felt relief, as if a weight I didn't know I was carrying had been lifted. I closed my eyes and said to myself like a prayer, this money is not revenge, it's reparation. And with that, I opened the Rhine Cruise page. I went all the way to where it said book and reserved a cabin with a view, all-inclusive, a full year of travel, of silence, of wine and castles, of not being useful to anyone but myself. Because sometimes freedom comes without slamming doors, just with a signature. I never thought I would see my name on an international plane ticket, but there it was, M. Whitmore, cabin D3, Rhine cruiser, Rouen. Departure May 12th, Amsterdam. I printed it on thick paper, as if that made it more real, and put it inside the locket, just behind the photo of Brian as a child, not out of nostalgia, but for contrast. My passport would finally stop being blank. Rita came to see me that afternoon. She brought a box of almond cookies and a smile as wide as it was suspicious. "Have you booked already?" she asked as soon as she came in. "Done everything. I'm leaving in 3 weeks, a year, all of Europe, and a cabin just for me," I said while serving tea. "And you're going to tell him?" She didn't need to say the name. I knew who she meant, who it was always about. "No," I said, smiling. "He'll find out when he sees the note." "What note?" I went to the desk drawer and took out a folded paper. In my best handwriting, it said, "I went exploring, just like I was told I should." Rita burst out laughing, that clumsy laugh that comes out when something seems brilliant and fair. "You're a genius, Margaret, a silent genius." We toasted with tea as if it were champagne, and for a second, we were both 20 years old again, two women on the threshold of something new. The following weeks were a parade of intimate preparations. I emptied my closet, keeping only what would be useful in Europe. I donated the rest, not out of generosity, but for cleansing. "I'm not taking what made me feel invisible," I said to myself as I closed the last box. I went to the bank, managed my accounts, went to the insurance company, went to the notary, all calmly, discreetly, as one does with movements that mark a before and an after. The house was empty 2 days before my departure. Claudia told me the new owners had the keys. She asked me to stop by one last time, just in case I wanted to say goodbye. I didn't want to. Instead, I left the note on the front door, just below the bell. I taped it carefully, making sure the paper was straight. It's one thing to leave and another to leave with elegance. I went to the airport with a single light suitcase, inside and out. In the waiting lounge, a woman asked me if I was traveling with family. "No," I said with a smile. "This trip is only mine." And for the first time in my life, that didn't hurt me. I sat in front of the window. The plane hadn't arrived yet, but the future was already on the runway, because the ticket wasn't just to the other side of the world, it was to the other side of myself. The taxi stopped in front of the house just at dawn. The street was silent, barely interrupted by the scattered song of some early bird. There were no cars in the driveway, no bicycles lying in the grass, no children's laughter in the background, just me and my suitcase. I got out of the car with slow, almost ceremonial movements. I stopped in front of the door. I no longer had a key, and I didn't need one. Everything mine was in that suitcase and in my bag. The rest was part of another story. I took the folded paper out of my pocket, smoothed it carefully, and taped it right in the center of the door with 2 pieces of transparent tape. I read it one last time, not because I doubted, but because I wanted to savor it. I went exploring, just like I was told I should. I didn't sign it, it wasn't necessary. I walked back to the taxi without looking back once. "Airport?" the driver asked. "Yes," I responded and added, "International." He adjusted the rearview mirror, threw a curious look, as if trying to guess my story, but didn't ask, and I didn't offer anything. During the journey, I clung to the locket. It was the only thing I hadn't changed. Inside was the photo of Brian as a baby and now the cruise ticket, past and future, back to back. That didn't hurt as a contradiction anymore. Upon arriving at the airport, the air smelled of reheated coffee and public bathroom soap, but to me, it smelled of freedom. At the security checkpoint, the agent looked at me tenderly when she saw my empty passport. "First time?" "First of many," I told her. And it was true. Now on board, with the seatbelt fastened and the window fogged by the breath of so many kept dreams, I closed my eyes. I thought about Brian's face when he saw the note, about Nicole searching in vain for her Nordic vanilla candle, about the grandchildren asking if Grandma would come back for Christmas. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for not being there. I felt fair. The plane took off with a soft roar, as if it knew it was carrying someone who had finally let go. I didn't take pictures of anyone, didn't send messages, didn't warn, because this time it wasn't about them, it was about me. And although just for that first second in the air, I felt it, the lightness, the total absence of chains, the beginning. The sun fell slowly on the Rhine River, painting the water gold and indigo. I was on the deck, wrapped in a light scarf, with a glass of Riesling in hand. To my side, the soft murmur of the water and, in the distance, the towers of a castle high on a hill. I thought I would feel alone, but what I felt was something else, something I hadn't experienced in years: tranquility. My phone vibrated once. A message from Claudia, the real estate agent, keys handed over. The new owners moved in this morning, everything completed. I read the message and then turned off the cell phone. I put it at the bottom of my bag without urgency. I let out a long sigh, as if only then I understood that I had been breathing half-heartedly for years. "First time in Europe?" asked a voice next to me. A woman with a Texan accent, gray hair perfectly combed, smiled at me as she raised her glass. "First of many," I responded, smiling. "What shall we toast to?" she asked. I looked at the horizon. The wind moved my hair with tenderness. The castle reflected in the water seemed to come from a dream I never allowed myself to dream. "To new chapters," I said. She nodded with enthusiasm. "And to writing them ourselves," she added. We toasted again, this time with more force. I leaned back on the wooden chair. I let the sun warm my cheeks. I thought of Rita, her husky laugh, how she held my gaze when my voice trembled. I thought of Helen, who sent me a message tomorrow. "Have you smiled yet today?" "I hope so. And if not, drink to me." I thought even of Brian, not with pain, not with anger, with distance, like someone remembering an old house that was once home, but no longer. The ship continued its course. The river didn't ask where it was going, just moved forward, constant, serene, beautiful. I brought the glass to my lips and drank slowly. The wine was sweet, clear, strong, how I wanted to be from now on. And then I knew. This trip was not an escape, it was a return. A return to myself, to that woman who once dreamed with postcards, to that young mother who forgot her name between bills and diapers, to that old woman who, finally, chose herself. Because there are paths that are only found after losing everything, even fear. And as the ship sailed away, leaving behind unknown shores and old certainties, I allowed myself to smile, not because everything was fine, but because it was finally starting to be. 2 days later, in the stillness of the morning, I leaned over the deck railing with a cup of hot coffee in my hands. The boat glided smoothly through the dawn fog, as if reluctant to disturb the world's silence. In the distance, the trees reflected their shadows in the water, as if they too wanted to keep sleeping. It was then that my phone, forgotten at the bottom of my bag, vibrated. A single notification, temporary Wi-Fi. A message from the lifelong neighbor, Mrs. Ellison. They came back yesterday. They stopped the car in front of the house. They were shouting at the entrance for more than 10 minutes. Brian kicked the sold sign as if it were his fault they couldn't get in. I stayed inside, just in case. They were furious. "Just wanted to tell you, you did the right thing, honey." I read the message twice. I didn't laugh, I didn't cry, I just read it. Then I turned off the cell phone, put it back, and turned toward the river. The sun was beginning to break through the mist, and the world filled with soft colors, like a painting someone had just started. The rooftops of a small German town appeared in the distance. The ship announced we would soon dock. Someone to my side was taking photos. Another was buttoning a coat. Life went on, oblivious, serene. I didn't turn around. I didn't try to imagine their faces when they saw the closed door, the note taped, the palpable absence. I didn't need revenge, not anymore. What I felt was not hate, it was lightness. For years, I clung to a love that only hurt, out of fear, out of habit, out of guilt. But now I was free from justifying myself, from saving those who never had the courage to save me. "Ready for the ride?" said a guide with a French accent, peeking out from the deck. I nodded and stood up. As I walked toward the ship's exit, with my camera hanging around my neck and a scarf carelessly tied, I understood something. It's not about punishing anyone. It's about reminding yourself that you can still choose, that you can close a door and open the world. I never looked back because the only thing left was a version of me I no longer needed, and what was waiting just beyond the pier was something I never thought I'd have, a day completely mine. The phone rang while I was having coffee in a small floating cafe in Strasbourg. I had bought a crouton with almonds and was entertained watching the swans floating down the canal. I saw the name on the screen, Brian. It didn't vibrate, it was a direct, determined call. I let it ring once, twice, and then, with a calmness that surprised myself, I answered. Mom. His voice sounded altered, as if he had been running. What did you do? Did you sell the house? How could you do that without telling us anything? Silence on my part. I just listened. We arrived and couldn't get in. Everything was empty. There's another family there now. What kind of person does that? His tone rose with each word. I took a sip of coffee when I finally spoke, slowly. Of course, as if you'd apologize. The house stopped being my home the day I started knocking on my own kitchen door. Silence. I didn't leave, Brian. You stopped seeing me years ago. I'm just accepting it. But why didn't you tell us anything? That's not done. And you? I asked without raising my voice. Did you tell me anything when you mocked me for wanting to travel, when you asked me to take care of the house as if it were a burden, not a mother? Did you tell me anything when you filled my space with labels and left no room? I heard him breathe, agitated, hurt, but I didn't interrupt. All my life I worked to give you something better, but the best I can give you now is my absence, because only then you'll understand what it was like to have me. Mom. His voice sounded broken, as if he hadn't yet realized what part of me he had lost. I'm fine, Brian. I'm happy, and for the first time in years, I'm not shaking as I say it. Where are you? I smiled. Where I always wanted to be. Writing my story, not yours. And with that, I hung up, not with anger, not with tears, only with certainty. The waiter came to clear my plate. He asked in French if everything had been fine. I nodded, left him a good tip, and stood up. Outside, the world kept turning, without waiting for permission, without justifying its movements. I did too. And for the first time in my life, hanging up on my son didn't feel like a loss, it felt like a statement. She told me everything by email that same night. Brian was standing on her porch with a discomposed face and the phone in his hand. She did it, he told her without even saying hello. She sold it. She really sold it. Rita wasn't moved. She stood in the doorway without inviting him in. Yes, she replied in her firm voice, without sweetness. She warned you, only you didn't see it coming. Brian frowned like a scolded child. She's crazy. This is madness. Rita took a step toward him and closed the door behind her, making it clear she wasn't even going to offer coffee or consolation. She's not crazy, Brian. What's happening is that for the first time in her life, she's tired of waiting for permission to live. He looked at her as if he didn't recognize her, as if suddenly all the adults from his childhood were revealing themselves. But she's my mother. She could have told us something. Rita took a folded postcard from her sweater pocket. It was the one Margaret had left her before departing, with precise instructions for when he came to throw a tantrum, hand it over without explanation. She extended it. Brian read it standing up, still with his forehead red with frustration. Prague is colder than I expected, but the wine helps. Please don't make Rita put up with your tantrums. Rita crossed her arms. That was the kindest she wanted to be. Brian looked at her for a long time, said nothing, just lowered his head like someone who, for the first time, begins to understand the magnitude of what they've lost. Where is she now? What do you want to know for? She asked. To convince her to cook for you again, to return to living in the corner of your life? He didn't answer. He stood there a moment longer, then put the phone in his pocket and walked away with slumped shoulders. Rita told me she saw him cross the street and head toward a friend's house, who later heard he was looking for a place to rent. He's learning, Margaret, she wrote, even if it's with blows. And you're blooming. I closed the email. Outside, the Swiss mountains slid by the train window like vivid watercolors. And for the first time, I felt everything was in its place, even what was broken. Rita wrote to me last night. I got her email as the train crossed the Swiss Alps, winding through pines and white peaks as if traveling inside a postcard. The subject just said, Drama Update. Brian is sleeping at a friend's house, she told me. It seems he can't find a place to stay long term. He says rents are impossible, that Nicole is furious, that the kids don't understand why they can't go to Grandma's house. I read the sentence twice. It didn't hurt. I didn't blame myself. I just read it as if it were an anecdote that no longer belonged to me. I closed the laptop carefully and turned my gaze toward the window. Outside, the mountains stretched majestically, white and serene. The sky was clear, and everything seemed untouched by the world I left behind. Margaret, who would once have wept for that email, who would have sent money or apologies or advice disguised as an apology, was no longer on that train. I was there instead. I felt neither pride nor joy. I felt distance, the kind you feel when you stop belonging to a place that used to be painful. The carriage was silent, only the murmur of the train, soft and steady. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the seat. I held onto the locket as always, but this time without fear of opening it. Inside was still the photo of Brian and, behind it, the cruise ticket. I didn't change them because I didn't need to erase the past, just understand that it doesn't define the future. I poured some tea from the passing cart, chamomile. I smelled it, smiled. Some things don't change, but now I drank it in a porcelain cup in front of the Alps, with my name on an itinerary I chose alone. That night, I slept with the sound of the train in the background, deep and monotonous, like a heart finally beating to the rhythm of its own life. And for the first time in years, I slept without wondering if anyone needed me, because the only thing I needed was this silence, this landscape, this peace that you don't have to ask permission for from anyone. Yeah,